She walked in auction alone, just a teenage girl surrounded by cold stares and barking dogs. But when she pointed to the most dangerous German Shepherd on the lot and said, "That one's mine," everyone went silent. What she revealed next shook the entire room and uncovered a truth no one saw coming. Tonight, the warehouse was buzzing. A storm was coming in, wind rattling the old sheet metal roof, but the buyers still came, flashlights in hand, clipboards tucked under arms, eyes scanning the cages like shopping aisles. Most of the bids were decided before the dogs even barked, and then the girl walked in. She couldn't have been older than 16. Thin, pale, dressed in black jeans and an oversized jacket that hung off her shoulders like a borrowed identity. Her boots were muddy, her hair tied back in a tight braid. She carried no papers, no leash, no money. Just a folded photo clutched in her hand. Heads turned immediately. She didn't belong here. This wasn't a place for teenage girls. It was a place where veterans and men with hollow eyes came to buy second chances in the shape of muscle and teeth. Someone muttered under his breath. Another laughed. But she kept walking. She passed the first row of cages without flinching, ignoring the snarls and barking. Her eyes flicked from dog to dog, searching for something. Not just a breed or a color, something deeper. Recognition. Memory. At the far end of the warehouse was a cage separate from the others, larger, reinforced with double locks and steel mesh. A red tag hung from the door. K9067, unfit. Euthanize if unsold. Inside sat a massive German Shepherd, his coat darker than night, his eyes sharper than broken glass. He didn't bark, he didn't move, he just watched her. The auctioneer noticed the girl approaching the cage and stepped forward, waving her off. "Stay back, miss, that one's not for you, he's beyond handling." But she stopped in front of the cage and stared in. The dog stared back. They didn't move. For a long time, the warehouse noise faded, the buyer's chatter dulling into background hum. There was only the sound of the wind and the soft rattle of the dog's breathing. She held up the photo in her hand. It was faded and creased, but the image was clear. A uniformed officer, a younger version of the dog, and a little girl, barely 5, smiling with her arms wrapped around them both. She whispered, "Rocco?" The dog blinked. A muscle in his jaw twitched. The girl stepped forward, placing her hand against the cage. The German Shepherd stood. The auctioneer's voice cut through the silence, nervous now. "You need to back away. That animal isn't safe." But the girl didn't move. She looked straight ahead, her voice steady. "I'm not here to buy a dog," she said. "I'm here to bring my father's partner home." The moment the girl spoke, the room changed. The auctioneer took a slow step back, exchanging glances with a nearby handler who tightened his grip on a leash. One by one, conversations died down. Men with thick arms and worn boots turned to stare. Their eyes narrowed, curiosity at first, then suspicion. She didn't flinch. She stood like she belonged, like she had every right to be there. But it was clear to everyone that she didn't. This was a world of rules and routines, of scarred animals and scarred people. It was a world that didn't make room for soft things, especially not girls who looked like they belonged in a school hallway instead of standing in front of a dog that could rip through a Kevlar vest. Someone near the back chuckled. "She's lost." Another added, "Somebody call child services." But the girl ignored them. Her eyes stayed locked on the dog. Rocco? He hadn't moved since standing. He didn't bark or snarl, just stared at her with an intensity that unnerved even the handlers. His ears were forward, his head tilted slightly, like he was studying her face, trying to reach through the fog of whatever the world had done to him. The handler stepped forward. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low and firm. "This dog's a problem. He's attacked 3 men in 6 months, failed reconditioning, doesn't follow commands, doesn't bond. You're not safe near him." She turned her head slowly toward him. "I know who he is." The handler raised an eyebrow. "You think you do?" "I know I do," she said, holding up the photo again. "He was my father's K9 partner. He was with him the night he died." That sentence dropped into the room like a stone in still water. You could hear it ripple. Through the expressions, through the tightening jaws, through the silence that followed. The auctioneer walked over, snatched the photo from her hand, and looked it over. His eyes scanned it, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition. Regret. Maybe both. He passed it to the handler, who frowned as he examined it. "That's him," the handler muttered under his breath. "His name was Rocco," the girl continued, her voice trembling now, not from fear but from memory. "He went missing after my father was killed. They told us he ran off in the confusion, but I don't believe that. I think he was left behind." The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Miss, even if that's true, it doesn't change protocol. This dog's property now. Dangerous property. We can't just—" She cut him off. "I'm not asking, I'm telling you, I came to bring him home." The crowd murmured again, more restless this time. Rachel, a woman from the back wearing a handler's patch, stepped forward. "Do you have paperwork, identification, anything that proves your story?" The girl shook her head slowly. "Number, just this." She pointed at her heart. "And him. If I'm wrong, he won't come near me. If I'm right, then you'll see." Rocco remained still, watching her every move. He hadn't barked, hadn't bared his teeth, hadn't blinked. Another handler whispered to the auctioneer, "We've never seen him like this." The girl stepped closer to the cage. Someone moved to stop her, but the auctioneer raised a hand. "Wait." She stopped just inches from the bars and whispered one word, something private, something small. "Partner." Rocco's ears twitched, his body lowered, not in threat, but in surrender. The girl took a breath and said, "You know me." And for the first time since he was brought to this place, the monster in the cage let out a soft, familiar sound. A whine. His cage sat farther from the others, not by chance, but by necessity. Reinforced steel bars, a double lock system, a thick warning sign, bold red letters etched with permanent marker. K9067. Do not approach. Bite risk. Unfit for service. And scribbled just beneath it, barely legible. Scheduled for termination, 5 days. To the staff, he was nothing more than a liability, a failed asset, a remnant of a life no one wanted to remember. He had come in through government channels, passed down from a defunct department, then reclassified through a private handler's sale. No paperwork clean enough to trace his story. No one willing to fight for him. They called him Ghost, not because of his appearance, but because of the way he moved. Quiet, calculated, cold. No barking, no lunging, just a slow, eerie awareness, like he was always waiting for something to happen, something bad, something violent. Staff members avoided his cage like it was cursed. He had been through 6 facilities in 2 years, bit 3 handlers, sent 1 to the ER. Every evaluation came back the same. Extreme defensive behavior, non-compliant, no rehabilitation progress, recommend euthanasia. But none of them had asked what happened before the bites. None of them had looked him in the eye long enough to see the flicker of memory underneath the layers of trauma. They didn't see a broken bond. They saw a broken beast until today. Until her. Now, for the first time, Ghost wasn't pacing. He was still, composed, watching. The girl's hand still hovered near the cage door, but she hadn't touched it. She knew better. She was too young to have formal training, but the way she moved, slow, deliberate, steady, told the handlers something else. She wasn't guessing. She remembered. A ripple of unease passed through the room. One of the buyers stepped forward, arms folded, badge clipped to his belt. "Look, kid, even if that's your dad's dog, that doesn't change anything. The animal's been flagged. You know what that means?" She didn't answer him. She turned to the auctioneer. "How long has he been here?" The man scratched his beard, reluctant. 8 months, came from out of state, transferred after biting a transport officer. Would have been put down already, but the paperwork got buried. She nodded. "And no one's tried to take him?" "No," he said flatly. "No one's that stupid." Behind him, the dog growled, but not at her, at him. She knelt again and whispered the name the world had erased from his file. "Rocco!" The growl stopped. The girl reached into her coat and pulled out an old leather collar, faded, torn, almost falling apart. On it was a small round tag etched with one word, partner. She held it up. Rocco moved, not fast, not erratic. Slowly he stepped forward until his nose touched the cage bars, right where the tag dangled. His chest rose and fell in heavy breaths, but his eyes never left hers. It was him. The room fell silent again. "I want to file a claim of recognition," she said, standing. "This dog is misidentified. He's not K9067. He's Officer Rocco, badge companion of Lieutenant Daniel Price, killed in the line of duty 17 months ago." The auctioneer shook his head. "That kind of claim doesn't mean anything without DNA confirmation. You need handler verification, which you don't have." She held up the photo again, this time shaking. "I do." But the man sighed, already looking away. "Unless someone bids, he's still marked for termination." The girl's face went pale. She didn't have money, didn't have authority. All she had was the truth, and 5 days. 5 days to stop the clock on a death sentence, and convince the world that the dog with the kill stamp was never the threat. He was the witness. The auctioneer tried to move on. He shuffled his clipboard, announced the next dog's ID number, and gestured toward a more stable-looking shepherd 3 cages down. The crowd reluctantly turned their attention, some muttering, others glancing back toward the girl still standing in front of the condemned cage. The show had to go on. There were bids to collect, but she didn't move. Her voice cut through the chatter, calm, clear, and razor-sharp. "That one's mine." The auctioneer paused, frowning. "Excuse me?" She pointed directly at Rocco, who now sat at the front of his cage, perfectly still. "That one. I'm not here to shop. I came to bring him home." Laughter burst out behind her. A middle-aged man in tactical gear clapped his hands once sarcastically. "You hear that? She's claiming a K9 like she's picking a puppy at a pet store. Does she even have a license?" someone added. "Kid, you'll lose an arm," another warned. She didn't flinch. She stepped forward, reaching into her backpack. Out came a small file, worn, stapled corners bent. She placed it on a nearby table. "These are my father's records. He served 12 years on the force. Rocco was his partner for 5 of them. This is not just a dog, he's family." The auctioneer raised his hands. "Look, I don't doubt your story, but you don't understand how this works. These dogs aren't pets, they're property, government property, often reclassified through military or private contracts. Without formal release, your claim holds no weight." She looked at him, eyes burning. "Then make it personal. This isn't about contracts, it's about what's right." The handler from earlier stepped forward, more cautious now. "Even if we wanted to believe you, what makes you think you can control him? This dog nearly tore a man's arm out 2 months ago." She walked closer to the cage. Rocco didn't growl. He stood up, ears forward, tail low, not wagging but waiting. She crouched. "I don't want to control him," she said softly. "I want to remind him who he is." A hush settled over the warehouse. Rocco stepped toward the bars. The girl removed her jacket sleeve slowly, revealing a scar on her forearm, small, white, faded with time. She held it up. "He gave me this when I was 5, she said. "It was an accident. I surprised him while he was eating. I cried for an hour, but he wouldn't stop licking my hand, wouldn't leave my side for days." A gasp rose from someone in the back. "He remembers me." As if on cue, Rocco let out a low, soft whine, the same sound he had made when her father came home from shift each night, the same sound she hadn't heard since the day he died. The auctioneer stared at the pair, girl and beast, framed in silence. He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly torn. "Even if I wanted to, I can't just hand him over." "Then let me bid," she said. "You don't have the funds." "I'll find them." "You have 5 days, he muttered. "That's the law. If no buyer steps in by then, euthanasia goes forward. That's not my call. That's the system." She stood slowly and faced the crowd. "Then let me make it yours." The room fell quiet again. The girl stood in the middle of a world not made for her, surrounded by doubters, cynics, and killers. And still, she said it again, this time louder. "That one's mine." She had only been 13 when it happened. It was supposed to be just another shift. Her father, Lieutenant Daniel Price, kissed her forehead that morning and promised they'd go for pancakes the next day. She remembered the way his uniform smelled, faint cologne, fresh coffee, and the sharp scent of Rocco's fur. Her father never left without him. They were partners, sworn and inseparable. But he didn't come back. The doorbell rang after midnight. Her mother had already been pacing. The lights were still on. When Rachel Price opened the door and saw 2 uniformed officers standing there, their hats in their hands, her legs gave out before they even spoke. Her father had been ambushed during a drug raid. a setup. They walked into a trap, and everything went wrong. Bullets from both sides, chaos, screams. Her father was hit twice in the chest. Rocco, his K9 partner, had been there too, but in the reports, his name barely appeared. Dog fled the scene, presumed lost in crossfire, unable to recover K9. They called it an unfortunate casualty, but she didn't believe it, not for a second. At the funeral, she sat in the front row, her hands clutched tight in her lap. She was surrounded by uniforms, badges polished, eyes cold and wet. They honored her father, said the right things, folded a flag, and placed it in her mother's arms. But something was missing. Rocco. He should have been there, sitting beside the casket, wearing the vest that read, Police K9, honoring the man who raised him, trained him, loved him. But he was gone. Just a paragraph in a final report. After that day, the house changed. Her mother stopped talking much. The photos came off the walls. Her father's uniform stayed in the closet, untouched, sealed like a memory no one wanted to open. But she couldn't let it go. Not the way the world had just erased Rocco, as if he had vanished, unworthy of being mourned. She started digging. First, small things. Google searches, old news clips, K9 retirement policies. Then, deeper, talking to old officers, combing through archive department files, making burner social accounts to reach handlers. For 2 years, she chased dead ends. Then one night, in a late-night online forum, someone posted an anonymous photo. A German shepherd in a steel cage. The image was grainy, but something about the posture, the shape of the face, the scar above the left eye, it all clicked. Her heart raced. The tag read, K9-067, scheduled for auction. It wasn't just hope, it was recognition. She traced the photo back to a private auction list, cross-referenced the timeline, the location, and the intake record. One name kept appearing, R. Handler, retired military, known for flipping dogs for cash. He'd received a wounded shepherd with a history of obedience trauma. The paperwork had no birth record, no origin, just a barcode. But she didn't need records, she had memory, and a scar on her arm from when she surprised Rocco during a thunderstorm when she was 6. He'd nipped her accidentally, instinct, and then refused to leave her side for 2 days. She still had the scar, and he still had the memory. The auction was her only chance. She lied to her mother, said she was sleeping at a friend's house, took a bus across 3 towns, hid in the back until they opened the gates, walked in with nothing but a photo, a collar, and the kind of grief only a daughter could carry. She wasn't just trying to save a dog. She was trying to bring home the last piece of her father the world forgot. It started like any other evening, routine, even forgettable. Her father had kissed her on the forehead, whispered, "I'll be home by sunrise," and ruffled her hair with his calloused hand. She didn't know it then, but that would be the last time she'd feel his touch. The last time she'd see him smile. The raid was supposed to be clean. A controlled operation, in and out. A known stash house, no civilians, low-level suspects. Her father had done 100 just like it. The only difference this time was the intel. It was wrong, dead wrong. Inside the house, there were more men than expected, more weapons, traps. The ambush was planned, brutal, and merciless. The first shot hit Officer Morales. The second caught her father. Chaos erupted, shouting, flashlights, blood. Rocco lunged to protect him, taking one hit across the flank before being kicked back into a wall. And in the panic, someone opened a side door, and he bolted. That's what the report said. The K9 unit broke protocol and fled the scene. Like he was just a frightened animal. Like he hadn't been trained to protect and serve. Like he hadn't stayed by her father's side every night, guarding the front door like it was sacred. She didn't believe it. Rocco didn't run. He waited. Somewhere out there, the dog she knew, the one who guarded her like a second father, was still grieving. Lost, maybe injured, maybe locked up, but not gone. Never gone. The world moved on, but she didn't. In the weeks that followed, everything unraveled. She stopped speaking in school. Her grades plummeted. She quit the soccer team. The house felt colder without her dad's laugh, without his boots thudding against the floor, without the thump of Rocco's tail at the door every time the garage opened. Her mother tried to keep things normal, but grief doesn't follow rules. It breaks dishes and slams doors. It hides in corners. It steals sleep. And over time, it builds walls so tall you forget what it was like before they were there. She spent nights in her father's garage, going through old files, sniffing old uniforms just to remember. She'd lay next to Rocco's unused bed, tracing the stitching on his vest. Police K9, Unit 11. It still smelled like him. That was where she made a silent vow. She would find him. She didn't care if no one believed her. She didn't care if people called her obsessed. That dog was more than a partner. He was part of their family. And if there was even a chance he was alive, she wasn't going to let him be buried by red tape and forgotten paperwork. That determination led her down a digital rabbit hole: forums, training logs, anonymous message boards for handlers and trainers who dealt with problem dogs. One night, buried beneath a list of private K9 liquidation events, she saw a blurry photo posted by an anonymous user. Beware, shepherd with aggression issues, scar above left eye. It was him. She knew it in her bones. She traced the source to a handler, 2 states over, who sold dogs with failed records to private buyers. Somehow, Rocco had slipped through the system, rebranded as K9067. No name, no history. Just a file that said unfit. The auction was listed for Friday. That gave her 5 days. She emptied her savings, borrowed from a friend, bought a one-way bus ticket with cash, and took her father's badge, still tucked in a velvet box, and Rocco's old collar, the one she'd never stopped carrying in her backpack. She didn't tell her mother. She couldn't. Because this wasn't something she could explain. It was something she had to do. Because when the world breaks you, sometimes the only way to fix it is to find the one thing that remembers who you were before everything shattered. The storm had begun to settle outside, but inside the warehouse, the air was thick with unease. The girl stood near Rocco's cage, one hand resting on the cold steel mesh, her fingers brushing against the air gap, like she was trying to reach through memory itself. She hadn't flinched, hadn't backed down, but the weight of a dozen skeptical stares pressed heavy against her back. That's when the handler stepped forward. He wasn't like the other buyers, no suit, no clipboard. He wore combat boots, dark jeans, and a faded army green jacket with the patch half torn from the sleeve. His face was lined with years, the kind that only came from watching things go wrong again and again. "I was the one who brought him in," he said. The girl turned slowly. "You mean Rocco?" He snorted. "We don't use names around here. Names are for pets. He's K9067 now. That's how the system keeps emotion out of it." She narrowed her eyes. "He's not a number. He's my father's partner." The man stared at her for a long beat. "Yeah, I read the file. Daniel Price. Good cop. Got caught in a bad raid. Everyone in the handler network knew about it. Shame about the dog. No one ever claimed him? I'm claiming him now." He stepped closer, folding his arms. "Let me tell you what you're claiming." She didn't speak. "You're claiming a dog that bit 3 men, tore through a reinforced crate, and chewed his way out of a steel door once. You're claiming a liability. One that's been sedated more times than I can count. He's not stable. He doesn't trust, doesn't bond, doesn't respond." The girl glanced at the cage, where Rocco sat watching the handler silently, body tense but still. He responded to me. "That's adrenaline, muscle memory, a flicker of something old, but it doesn't mean it's safe. I'm not afraid of him." The handler laughed dryly. "That's the problem. You should be." She looked him square in the eye. "Number. The problem is, you gave up on him before he had a chance." That hit something. His face twitched, his jaw tightened. But he didn't argue. Instead, he gestured toward the cage. "Look at him. He's still in high alert posture. He hasn't relaxed since you got here. You think he remembers you? Maybe, but that doesn't mean he won't snap." "Then give me 1 minute with him, alone." The handler blinked. "You're serious?" "I want inside the cage. You're out of your mind." The auctioneer, who had been listening from a few feet away, stepped forward. "Absolutely not. If something happens, this whole operation gets shut down." But the girl didn't break her gaze. "You said he doesn't bond, that he's unreachable. Let me prove you wrong. You've got nothing to lose." The handler shook his head. "Kid, we don't need more proof he's dangerous." "No," she said quietly. "You need proof he's still in there." Silence. Everyone watched the handler. He looked back at the cage, then at the girl, then at the scar on her forearm. Finally, he exhaled. 1 minute, I'll be inside the lock zone. You make any sudden move, he so much as twitches. We pull you out. The girl nodded. The handler turned to the auctioneer. Unlock the cage. The keys rattled. Rocco stood, head tilted. He didn't growl, didn't move, just waited. The gate creaked open, and as the girl stepped inside, everyone held their breath, not because they feared the bite, but because they sensed something bigger, something buried beneath muscle and memory, something no handler could ever train. Recognition. The cage door clicked open with a sound that echoed far too loud in the silence. Every breath in the warehouse seemed to stop. The girl stepped inside slowly, her boots landing softly on the concrete floor. She didn't look around, didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. Her eyes were locked on Rocco. He stood in the far corner of the cage, motionless. His body was still, too still. Not in fear, but calculation. His eyes tracked her every movement, unreadable, not hostile, not welcoming, just alert. Like a soldier who'd been trained to expect betrayal. She took one more step and stopped. "It's me," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. No reaction. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept them open at her sides, palms exposed. No sudden moves, just presence, just memory. "You used to sleep by my bed," she whispered. "Dad would come home and take off your vest, and you'd lay there, just watching the door. You wouldn't let anyone near me, not even Mom when I was crying." Rocco shifted slightly. His ears twitched, still no sound. "They said you ran," she continued, "but I know you didn't. You stayed. You waited." She knelt slowly, never breaking eye contact. With trembling fingers, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the old leather collar. The tag with the word partner hung loosely from the metal ring. She laid it gently on the floor. "Do you remember this?" she asked. "You wore it every day before you got your official vest." The room outside the cage was dead silent. Dozens of eyes pressed forward against the mesh and glass. Cameras stayed down. No one dared speak. She slowly extended her scarred forearm, the same one he'd nipped all those years ago. She turned it palm up and set it on the ground beside the collar. "I still have this because of you," she said, "because you didn't let go." Rocco took a step forward. Someone outside shifted, and the handler instinctively raised his hand, ready to intervene. But the girl didn't move. "You're not a monster," she whispered. "You're my family." Rocco stepped again. 2 paws now. His tail remained low, ears still forward. But something in his body changed. The stiffness melted just slightly, like a frozen statue remembering how to breathe. She reached down, slowly, inch by inch, and tapped the floor in front of her. "Come here, boy." It was a phrase her father used every day. Rocco blinked, his head tilted. Then, without warning, he moved. One slow step, then another, and another, until he was standing right in front of her. The girl held her breath. Rocco lowered his head and pressed his nose into her palm. The warehouse erupted in gasps. A few people stepped back, stunned. Someone dropped a clipboard, but the girl just smiled through the tears now streaming down her cheeks. "You remember?" Rocco let out a soft, low sound. Not a growl, a whine, quiet, aching. And then, like a dam breaking, he leaned into her. Full weight. His body trembled as he curled against her lap, pressing his head into her chest. She wrapped her arms around him, her shoulders shaking. The handler at the gate whispered to the auctioneer, "I've never seen anything like this." The auctioneer didn't respond. He just swallowed hard and looked away. Inside the cage, the girl kissed the top of Rocco's head. "You waited for me," she whispered, "and I'm here now." For the first time in a long, long time. The cage didn't feel like a prison. It felt like home. The air inside the warehouse was still heavy, but different now, charged not with fear but awe. The crowd that had once scoffed at the girl now stood frozen, watching a moment no one could quite explain. A dog labeled unfit for society, aggressive, unpredictable, hopeless, was curled up like a child in her lap. She held him close, one hand gently stroking the fur behind his ears. Her other hand still gripped the faded collar she'd brought with her. the one with his real name etched on the tag, Rocco. Not K9-067, not the biter. Just Rocco, her Rocco. From the corner of the room, one of the handlers muttered under his breath, "No damn way." But it was happening. He remembered her. Not just as a scent or a figure from the past, but as someone who mattered, someone safe, someone he had loved before the world turned cold. The girl looked up, her cheeks tear-streaked but steady. "He knows me?" she said aloud now, not to brag, not to argue, just to state a truth that couldn't be ignored. "He remembers me." The auctioneer looked pale, as if the rules of his world had just cracked. He glanced down at the file in his hands, one that documented attacks, failed obedience, and euthanasia recommendations, and then back at the dog lying peacefully across the girl's knees. Rocco lifted his head and looked toward the crowd. He didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. He watched, his eyes sharp, focused, not on threats, but on her, guarding, protecting, like he used to when she was a child curled up on the couch watching cartoons while her father slept in his uniform on the recliner nearby. The girl reached for her sleeve and slowly rolled it up. There, plain and faded, was the scar, a crescent-shaped reminder of the moment that once scared her and bonded them forever. "He gave me this," she said, turning her arm so they could all see. "When I was 6, it was my fault. I startled him while he was eating. He barely grazed me, but afterward he wouldn't leave my side for 3 days." Someone near the front spoke, voice low with disbelief. "You mean, that's the same dog?" She nodded. "He's not broken. He's grieving." The handler who'd warned her earlier stepped closer to the cage, slowly now, as if approaching something holy. "He hasn't let anyone within 10 feet since he got here." She looked down at Rocco, who had laid his head back on her lap. "That's because they didn't speak his language," she said. "What language is that?" someone asked. She smiled faintly. "Love." The warehouse was silent again. For a moment, the entire space felt suspended in time. Concrete floors, rusted beams, men with guns. But at the center, just a girl and a dog who had found each other in the wreckage. The auctioneer cleared his throat. I don't know what to do here," he admitted. "We've never had a case like this." "Let me take him," she said. "Let me bring him home." He hesitated. "That's not how this works. He's on record. He's classified. We can't just hand him over." "I'll go through whatever process you need," she said firmly. "But I'm not leaving without him." Rocco stirred, as if sensing her conviction. And then, in one simple act, he made the decision for them all. He stood, walked to the front of the cage where the gate hung open, and sat. Just inside, waiting. Calm, proud. He wasn't a threat. He was a soldier, and he had remembered what soldiers do. They protect the ones they love. The silence didn't last. The spell of that sacred moment, girl and dog reunited, scars and all, was shattered by the auctioneer's voice, now more uncertain than before. "Look," he said, glancing at the stunned crowd. "Whatever this is, it doesn't change the paperwork. The dog is government classified and on a final hold list. He's not up for personal adoption." The girl stood, brushing dust from her jeans, her eyes burning with purpose. "Then I'll fight the paperwork." The handler stepped forward again. "You don't understand. This isn't just about getting a form signed. That dog's been declared unfit for civilian handling. Once that box is checked, it sticks. You'd have better luck fighting the moon." "I'm not asking for luck," she replied. "I'm asking for justice." A murmur rolled through the warehouse. A few bidders backed away. Others stayed rooted in place, drawn into something deeper than any auction could offer. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about meaning. The dog that nobody wanted now had someone willing to fight for him with everything she had. And she was just a kid. Rachel, the female handler who'd been quiet until now, stepped forward, holding a manila folder. "I pulled his files. There's a break in his transfer record, 6 months unaccounted for. No vet records, no behavioral logs. That's not normal." The auctioneer frowned. "Those gaps don't matter. What matters is his designation. He's flagged." Rachel turned to him. "That designation was based on incomplete data. That's grounds for appeal." "Appeal?" he scoffed. "To who?" Some city clerk who's never even seen a K9? To the department that trained him, Rachel said. To the precinct where he served. The girl's heart skipped. You can help me get that? Rachel nodded. Maybe, but it won't be easy. You'll need a handler's statement, incident reports, and someone from the force to back you. That kind of evidence takes time. I don't have time, the girl said. They gave him 5 days. She turned to the auctioneer. If I can prove who he is, if I can prove this dog was my father's partner, will you hold off the termination order? He rubbed his temple, clearly under pressure. Even if I said yes, I don't have the authority to stop it completely. That would need to come from state-level animal control. Then get them on the phone, she said. Now. Someone in the back scoffed. This is insane. She's just a kid. But another voice, an older man in uniform, stepped forward. She's more courageous than half the room. That changed something. Suddenly, people were on their phones. The buzz of whispers turned to action. Rachel pulled up contact lists. The auctioneer, reluctantly, made a call. The girl sat cross-legged beside Rocco again, who hadn't left her side since the minute she stepped into the cage. Hours passed. The room thinned, but some stayed, curious to see how far she'd take this. By sundown, she had a meeting set for the next morning with the retired chief from her father's precinct and a representative from the state K9 board. Rachel offered to drive her there. Rocco would stay overnight under surveillance, but not in isolation, in a calm enclosure, monitored and untouched. As they led him from the cage, Rocco didn't resist. He walked beside her, no leash required. Every step was a statement. He wasn't being taken, he was going home, one signature at a time. The shelter was quiet that night. Rocco lay on a padded mat in a private holding room, clean, warm, still under observation, but no longer locked behind a cage like a criminal. The girl sat on the other side of the glass, watching him, chin resting on her folded arms. She had stayed, refused to leave. They brought her a blanket and a sandwich she didn't touch, because sleep could wait. Her memories couldn't, and neither could his. Behind his golden brown eyes, something stirred, not fear, not confusion, something older, something buried beneath layers of training, trauma, and noise. It started with the scent. Her scent. The shampoo she used when she was little. The smell of peanut butter crackers she used to sneak under the table. Her father's jacket, worn, faded, still clinging faintly to her. It brought something back. And suddenly, the silence wasn't just the present. It was the past. He remembered the first time he saw her. A toddler wobbling through the living room in oversized socks, squealing with laughter. He wasn't allowed near her at first. The department trainer said, "This is a working dog, not a babysitter." But her father had a different rule. Family comes first. It began with a single moment. She dropped her stuffed animal. He fetched it. She giggled and hugged him. After that, they were inseparable. Rocco watched her grow, from picture books to school backpacks, from juice boxes to scraped knees. He was there for all of it. He remembered standing guard by the door while she slept. He remembered the time she fell off her bike and sobbed, not from pain, but because she thought her dad would be disappointed. Rocco had licked her tears until she smiled again. He remembered barking at the thunder every time she cried during a storm, just so it wouldn't sound so loud. And then he remembered the night everything went black. The warehouse, the gunfire, the smell of smoke and metal. Her father bleeding out on the cold floor. Rocco had lunged, fought, bit through skin and bone, but there were too many. He had been struck across the side, dazed, dragged away, caged, stripped of his vest, stripped of his name. They kept trying to reprogram him, erase what he had known. They fed him orders in strange voices, different tones. They treated him like a tool, but he wouldn't respond, couldn't, because part of him had died on that floor. Until now. Until her. Rocco stirred on the mat and lifted his head. On the other side of the glass, the girl was asleep, curled against the wall, her father's badge still clutched in her hand. He stood, walked to the glass, and sat, watching, waiting, remembering. In the morning, she opened her eyes and saw him sitting there, his gaze steady, his posture calm. No barking, no pacing, just presence. The handler on shift noticed it too. "He didn't sleep last night," he he said, jotting down a note. But he didn't panic either. No growling, no pacing, just watching her. Rachel arrived a few hours later with a file thick with documents, signed affidavits, old handler logs, even a grainy photo of Rocco from years ago, his police vest still intact, standing beside Lieutenant Daniel Price and a much younger version of the girl. They had everything they needed. The appeal would be formalized by noon. The dog, once marked as dangerous, would finally be known for what he truly was: a partner, a protector, a witness, and most of all, a soul who never forgot what it meant to love someone. Enough to wait. They told her it would take time. Even after the appeal went through, after the paperwork was signed and the transfer finalized, even after Rocco's name was officially restored. No more K9067, no more unfit. The trainers warned her not to expect too much. Reintegration takes weeks, they said, sometimes longer. Trauma rewires everything. But they didn't know Rocco, and they didn't know her. The ride home was quiet. He sat in the back seat of Rachel's SUV, not crated, just harnessed in, staring out the window. The girl sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his back. He didn't move away, but he didn't lean into it either. It was like watching someone slowly step into sunlight after years in the dark. The first night was hard. He didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't sleep. He paced the corners of her small bedroom, circled the carpet 3 times, then laid near the door like a soldier on night watch. She tried to coax him to his old bed, a soft pad with his name embroidered on it, but he stayed by the exit, guarding, as if part of him still wasn't convinced this peace would last. She didn't push him. She just sat beside him, night after night. No commands, no leashes, just presence. By the 3rd night, he curled beside her bed instead of the door. By the 5th, his head was on her blanket. And by the 7th, she woke up with his paw resting across her legs like he used to when she was small, claiming her as his again. In the mornings, she took him on quiet walks through the neighborhood. She kept his vest off, wanting him to feel like a dog again, not a tool. Kids pointed, neighbors stared. A few crossed the street, still wary of the stories, the labels. But she didn't care. Let them watch. He was hers now, and he was coming back to her, bit by bit. One afternoon, she found his favorite toy, the old rubber ball with a bite mark in the side. It had been in the garage for years. She rolled it across the floor, not expecting much. But he chased it, just once. And when he brought it back, tail twitching, she cried harder than she had the day they reunited. Later that week, she took him to the edge of the park. He hesitated at the open field, his muscles tensed. Something about the space, the distant shouting, the sound of a basketball bouncing. It triggered something. His breathing quickened. She knelt beside him and whispered, "It's okay. You're safe." It took 10 minutes for him to take one step forward, but he did. Every little step was a victory. Every tail wag, every sigh, every moment he leaned into her hand instead of pulling away. It all added up to something bigger than progress. It was redemption. The girl started journaling his changes, not for science, for memory. She wrote down the first day he licked her hand, the first time he barked, not in fear, but play. The first time he chased a squirrel and actually let himself be silly again. Rocco wasn't just healing, he was choosing to live again. Each night, she told him stories about school, about her father, about the world outside. He didn't understand the words, but he understood her tone, her laugh, the soft pauses between her sentences. And he listened, because deep down, in the part of him no one could break, he always had. It didn't happen in a moment. It happened over many. But everyone brought him home again, not to a house, to her. The park was full that Saturday. Children ran laughing through the grass, couples lounged under shady trees, and old men played chess on concrete tables like they had for decades. The girl stood at the edge of the open field, her heart thudding louder than it should have. Beside her, Rocco sat, ears high, body still. His eyes scanned the space, not in fear, but calculation. This was his first real outing. No shadows, no cages, no handlers hovering with tranquilizers in their pockets. Just the two of them, and the wide open world he hadn't walked in since everything fell apart. She tightened her grip on the leash, Not because she thought he'd bolt, but because this mattered. A soccer ball rolled near his feet. He flinched, then stood, muscles tensed. Two kids came chasing after it and stopped short when they saw him. Their smiles faltered. One of them whispered, "That's the scary dog." The girl heard it. She knelt beside Rocco, whispering, "Easy, boy. It's just a game." Rocco looked at her, then at the kids, and then he sat, calm, watchful, silent. She smiled and waved at the boys. "You can take the ball. He's safe." Hesitantly, one stepped forward. Rocco didn't move. The boy retrieved the ball, glanced at the dog once more, then kicked it back toward his friend. As they ran off, the girl stood and looked at Rocco again. "That," she whispered, "was courage." They walked further down the path, past the swings, past the pond. People stared. Some still looked uneasy, but a few smiled. One woman even said, "Beautiful shepherd. He's trained, huh?" The girl nodded. "Yes, very trained." It was a small sentence, but it meant the world. At the far end of the park, a group of officers were doing K9 demonstrations for families, public safety events to help rebuild trust in the program. She hadn't known it was scheduled, but when she saw the uniforms, her chest tightened. Rocco paused too. His ears dropped slightly. His tail stopped mid-swing. She knelt beside him. "We don't have to go near, not if you're not ready." But he took a step forward, then another. He wasn't afraid. Not anymore. They watched the demonstration from a distance. The new K9 units were good, obedient, focused. But none of them had his presence, his experience, his scars. One of the officers glanced over and froze. He recognized them. He walked over slowly. A tall man with gray in his beard and stripes on his sleeve. "Is that?" he started. She nodded. "Rocco, Lieutenant Price's partner." The man exhaled, emotion washing over his face. "I thought he was gone." "He was," she said softly. "But he came back." The officer crouched, hand out gently. "May I?" Rocco looked at the girl. She nodded, and Rocco stepped forward, no growl, no hesitation, and let the man rest his hand on his head. "You're a good boy," the officer whispered, his voice cracking. "Your old man would be proud." She didn't cry, not there, but something inside her settled. Because Rocco wasn't a secret anymore. He wasn't a cautionary tale buried in red tape. He was seen. And for the first time, the world didn't flinch when they looked at him. They saw a hero. As they walked back down the park trail, a little girl passed them, holding her mother's hand. She pointed at Rocco. "Mommy," she said, "that dog looks like an angel." The mother smiled. "Maybe he is, sweetheart. Maybe he was." The sky was painted in orange and gold when they pulled into the driveway. That evening felt heavier than most, less like another chapter in recovery, and more like the closing of a book they hadn't finished reading years ago. The girl opened the back door of the car, and Rocco stepped out slowly, his eyes scanning the familiar space, the porch, the oak tree, the scent of home. She didn't say a word, just walked to the side yard and reached for the small rusted key her dad used to hide beneath the stone rabbit by the fence. She hadn't touched it in years. It still fit. The shed door creaked open. Rocco followed. Inside, the light bulb flickered to life, revealing dust-covered boxes and old equipment. Against the back wall stood something wrapped in a sheet. She hesitated before pulling it away, revealing her father's police memorial shadow box, the one with his badge, patches, and folded flag. She had never brought herself to open it until now. She ran her fingers over the glass. "Dad used to come here when he couldn't sleep," she said softly, mostly to herself. "He'd sit on that stool, polish your vest, talk about the bad days, said it helped him clear his head." Rocco sat quietly beside her. He hadn't moved closer, but his eyes had softened, his ears flicking gently at the sound of her voice. She picked up an old photo, yellowed at the edges. Her father stood tall in uniform, one arm slung proudly over Rocco's back. Her younger self peeked out from between them, holding Rocco's leash with a grin too wide for her face. She knelt and placed the photo gently on the ground between them. "I used to think you were just my dad's partner," she whispered. "But I get it now. You were more than that." Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. "You were his brother, his protector, his best friend. You didn't just lose your handler that day. You lost your family. Rocco lowered his head and let out a soft, trembling sigh. Then, something unexpected happened. He stood up, walked slowly toward the wall where her father's uniform still hung on a peg, and pressed his nose against the fabric. He didn't bark, didn't whimper, just stood there, still and reverent, like a soldier saluting a fallen comrade. The girl covered her mouth. She couldn't hold the tears back now. She watched as Rocco sat beside the uniform, lifting his head toward the old photo above it. It was the closest thing to goodbye he had ever been able to give, and it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was silent loyalty, the kind that never fades, even when the world says it's time to move on. She walked over, knelt beside him, and leaned her head against his. "I miss him too," she whispered. They sat there in silence as the sun dipped lower, the shed glowing in golden light. Dust motes floated like memories in the air, soft, fragile, untouched. After a while, Rocco stood again and nudged her gently toward the door. It was time to go. Not to forget, but to carry forward. She locked the shed behind them, slipping the key back beneath the stone rabbit. As they stepped onto the porch, she looked down at the German Shepherd beside her. Not the aggressive dog from the auction, not the broken K9 from the files, but her father's partner, and now her own. One final memory, one final goodbye, and the beginning of something new. Morning light spilled across the porch like a quiet blessing. Birds chirped in the nearby trees, and the gentle hum of life resumed in the small town street beyond the fence. Inside the house, the air was still but peaceful. Rocco lay curled at the foot of her bed, his breathing calm, his eyes half closed, no longer alert from fear, but resting, finally at peace. It had been 4 weeks since the day she walked into the auction alone. 4 weeks since she looked at the world and said, "He's not broken." Now, his food bowl was in the corner of her kitchen, his leash hung by the door, and his collar, no longer marked with numbers, just his name, Rocco, rested gently against his fur every day. He belonged here, not just legally, not just emotionally, fully, completely, undeniably. He had a home. That morning, she clipped his leash to his collar and stepped outside into the sunlight. Neighbors smiled now when they passed. Kids waved. Even the grumpy old man next door had left a treat on the front steps a few days ago. "For the brave one," the note had said. They walked to the park again, like they had started doing every Sunday. She brought a small notebook, and Rocco trotted beside her with ease. He no longer tensed at sudden noises, no longer flinched when people approached. Each step he took was free from fear, like the chains had finally fallen off inside him. She found a bench under the old oak tree, the one with the long roots that always messed with the sidewalk pavement. Rocco lay at her feet, eyes watching a flock of pigeons pecking nearby. She opened the notebook. Inside, the pages were filled with memories, written in her handwriting, messy but full of heart. One entry read, "He didn't bark when the baby next door cried today. He just listened." Another, "Rocco played with the tennis ball again. He actually wagged his tail." But the last page was blank. Until now. She took her pen and wrote slowly, carefully, "He's not the dog he used to be. He's better, not because he forgot, but because he remembered everything worth holding on to. Loyalty, love, family, that's what saved him. And maybe that's what saved me too." She looked down at him and smiled. "You ready to go home?" He stood, stretched, and gently nudged her hand with his nose. As they walked back together, the sun warm on their backs, she thought about the word forever. It had always felt so fragile, like something you only say in fairy tales or whisper over gravestones. But this felt real. Forever wasn't about time. It was about choice. Rocco had chosen to survive when he didn't have to. He chose to remember her, chose to trust again, chose to love, even when the world told him not to. And she chose to believe in him, in second chances, in a love that could outlive loss. That night, as they curled up in bed, him at her feet, her with a book she barely read, she reached down and rested her hand on his head. "You're home now," she said softly, "and I'm never letting you go again." Rocco shifted closer, letting out a low, content sigh. Outside, the stars blinked awake. Inside, the past was at rest. And in that little house, guarded by a German shepherd once forgotten by the world, a quiet kind of forever began. The kind that doesn't need words, the kind you feel in your bones, the kind that tells you no matter what came before, you were always meant to find each other.